My name is Stephen Wall. So let's think a little bit about evolution of the brain, and specifically with regard to humans on this planet. Now, somebody along the way at some point in time said DNA represents the history of all mankind. Now, I don't think they actually meant historical events. This occurred on this date, that date. But what I think they meant was that DNA as the building block of human beings is a roadmap of all the evolutionary turns that have been made throughout the history of life on this planet. So, as an example, at some point in time, we evolved from one form to another. That is represented in our DNA. That is the history of mankind on this planet. Right. So let's look way back when there was essentially nothing but single cell organisms, and they're driven solely on biochemical reactions. I go this way or that way based on some biochemical reaction. I want this, I want that, I need that, I go that way, that type of thing. That is, in theory, life at some form, right? Not very interesting. Well, maybe to them, they would take offense to that, but not very interesting, right? And it continued to evolve. Time passed. All of a sudden, you've got multicellular organisms. They are still driven by biochemical reactions. There's really not much in terms of intelligence or consciousness in these objects. And it's just based on some reaction that turns one way or another. It's not really seeking out anything other than some reaction. And life goes on. Time passes. And also you go from a single cell organism to a more complex organism that starts exhibiting some form of intelligence beyond a biochemical reaction. And this is where you start getting some form of intelligence or consciousness of some form, very basic, right? It has senses. This is the first building block. It has senses, meaning it can sense things, as opposed to just a biochemical reaction. So it can see, hear, feel, that type of thing. These are very early organisms. It reacts to things, danger, fear. Obviously at this point you now have some form of consciousness. It wants to procreate. It feels the need to procreate. There is your first form of consciousness on the planet, and that is defined in our DNA. It's a roadmap. It may be a very, very, very long time ago, but it's still there. It may have been overwritten at some point in time with another genome sequence, but if you unwind it all, there it is, right? And it's typically regarded that would be in the ocean or some other environment such as that. I'm going to call it primordial ooze. Time has passed. Time keeps passing, as time does. And this organism continues to evolve. It now has some form of consciousness, and it reacts to external events, external environment. It knows what's dangerous. It knows what's not dangerous. It knows where it wants to be and where it shouldn't be. It knows it has the feeling or urge to recreate. Its senses continue to develop. Typically at the bottom of the ocean, you're going to be not a lot of senses in terms of taste or touch or smell, maybe not even eyes, but you have some form of perceiving the environment around you. Okay, perception. You perceive the environment around you and you react to it. You continue to evolve. And as survival of the fittest dictates on this planet, you either evolve or you die. It's that simple. You continue to evolve and you've determined that, wow, this ocean is really freaking dangerous. I don't want to be here anymore. So the first fish crawls out of the ocean, flops around for a bit, and dies. A few more to do this, and eventually you now have a form of species that is both water-based and land-based. Now, for those who know, communication on land is substantially different than communication in the water. So you have an organism that communicates in the water, be it a perception or sound or sonar or something like that, and they eventually crawl out of that environment and they crawl onto the land. Sonar or sound or whatever, substantially different in air as opposed to the water. But you have an organism that's based on surviving in water. And now it has to survive on land. Well, the brain of that organism, and assuming, of course, consciousness, has been developed over X number of years to perceive or feel in water. It's not in water anymore, so it evolves. As it's evolving, what do you think happens? Well, if I was that organism that was evolving, and my safe zone was still water, and I'd duck into that water once in a while based on my fear on land, I sure to hell ain't going to give up my only sense. So as the brain evolves, it keeps it. It keeps the ability to communicate in water. Sonar, sound, whatever. And it doesn't lose it. Because the brain evolves around into a more abstract or a higher level version of the brain. The lower primitive form is still there. And if you're lower primitive form, you are not giving up your only sense. I'm keeping it. The hell with you. So you develop a new form of senses around it. The history of life on this planet, DNA. It's all there. So now you're a very primitive form on land. You now have two forms of communication. One based on land and one based on water. And time passes. And so on. You now develop higher level capabilities, cognitive functions, and so on. Well, you're not going to lose your most primitive form of communication. You're not going to lose your second most primitive form of communication based on evolution. You build another function around it. So you now have three. Language ensues, so on and so on and so on. So you now have three forms of communication. And we evolve. So are those other two more primitive forms still there, working away? I don't see why not. There's nothing precluding it from. Can those other more primitive forms of communication reuse or hijack the more complex forms of communication, such as language, over time? Meaning evolving even further, saying, hey, I can communicate this way, but now I have language as an attribute that I can use. So now there's a two-way street of communication between the more primitive forms and the higher level forms. And there's a transformation to the lower forms based on a language. And it starts chittering back and forth, talking to one another, using a language that's now constructed from a higher level form. But that's assuming, of course, that these more primitive forms can evolve. Well, why the hell wouldn't they? Why the hell wouldn't the more primitive form, or the reptilian brain, continue to evolve as we evolve? Recognizing, hey, there's somebody out there, and he's talking really good language, and I can use that just by talking to him. Well, it's already done that, has it not? Because in crawling out of the ocean, it's got this old form of communication based on water, this new form of communication based on land, and those two guys are probably aware of each other, and they're going to talk. And they're going to talk back and forth. You get impedance mismatch between the two languages, of course, but they start talking back and forth on a new language that they both understand. You have the third higher level form, and guess what? You get the same thing. You're not going to throw away what you got. You're going to keep it. You start talking back and forth. Brain's talking back and forth all the time amongst these various functions, lower levels and higher levels. Is that beyond comprehension? Actually, no, it is not. In fact, it makes a hell of a lot of sense. It makes a shitload of sense. Have we ever looked for it? What do you mean, have we ever looked for it? Why wouldn't we? Have we? The amalgama, the reptilian brain, have we ever asked it or tried to speak to it directly using a language it understands? But why would you do that? You have the higher level form. Well, the reptilian brain probably got some interesting shit going on down there. Huh. Now, in our brains, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, theta. Those are all waves that the brain produces. Skip to eta, I'm not sure why. Again, people who have who know their Greek, eta goes right in between theta and the one below it, delta, I believe. Why would the brain skip that one? I know it's just a name, but it actually does produce an eta wave. Very, very light. Very, very light, and most people have got it so light it's not measurable. The eta wave happens to be the wave that is produced between the perception and cognition spaces in your brain. A high eta wave is actually a indicator of high ESP. But nonetheless, we can measure these independently of each other. We do that all the time in ECGs or EEGs or whatever the hell they are. Those are the languages used by our brain. Figure those out, and guess what? You can talk directly. If we could somehow isolate the waves produced by a brain that has only a reptilian brain and the second version, whatever that is, I think it's mammillary brain or whatever, where it became warm-blooded, meaning we crawled out of the water. If you could somehow isolate the waves between those two, you have now isolated the language that they speak. And to be frank, if it was me, I'm looking at this commonsensical, of course. If we're thinking language, we're thinking senses, we're thinking words, and we're hearing words and we're hearing the senses, I bet you money somewhere in those waves is us thinking. That actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. Somewhere in all the waves that the brain produces, we have words, voice. Wouldn't that be fun? Then we could talk directly to our brain, it would talk back. And given the right technology, we could record it. My name is Waddy. Can you hear me? Please hit that subscribe button. I'd like to continue my research, and hopefully YouTube can finance it for me. My name is Waddy. I think you heard me. Preceding audio and video cast is sole property of Stephen Watmore. It has been developed independent of any government, organization, business, or university or learning institute. If you wish to use this information or discuss this information, please contact me, Stephen Watmore, via the comments of the YouTube playlist, and I'll be more than happy to discuss this with you. If you would like to make donations towards continued research in this area and other areas, please contact me via the comments list, and I'd be more than happy to accept them. My name is Waddy. Can you hear me?